Welcome to the Behold podcast, a project of Arcade Church. We're so glad you've joined us. Today is part 2 of our 400 years intertestamental history lesson from Dr. Craig Hardinger. I have learned so much. I hope you enjoy this. We're going to look at the cultural and spiritual impact of those years between Malachi and Matthew. So give it a listen. Please subscribe, share, like, comment. Email us, behold@arcadechurch.com if you have questions. Listen in. Hey, Craig.
How you doing?
Well, I have a little bit of a bone to pick with you.
Not with me, sister. Nope, nope.
These appeared in my box.
I don't know why they did.
Corn nuts.
That was, okay, for the record, that was not me. I wish it was, though.
Now, hold on.
Okay.
You talk about food like cherry pies.
And I get cherry pies.
And you get cherry pies. You tell a story about a very non-good moment for me. It's probably sinful. And I get stupid corn nuts in my box.
You're welcome.
And they're not even good. They're chili. I don't even know if they taste good.
They're amazing. What are you talking about?
How do you know? Did you put them in my box?
No, I like corn nuts. I haven't had any there. Here you go. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah.
These are chili picante con
chili?
limon.
Man.
You're giving up.
No, just keep talking.
Oh,
Those
no.
are too hot.
I'm scared. Craig. Now we've lost all of our listeners. Are you done? Are you done yet?
I got a few more.
So do I get to list all the things I like so then maybe those will appear in my box
Make
instead
sure
of
you include Pop-Tarts.
corn nuts? Craig likes no frosting Pop-Tarts.
That's a different flavor. I've never had that flavor.
Do you like it?
I don't know if I'd like a lot of it.
Okay.
I think I had like 4 or 5, and it was good.
4 or 5's plenty. I'm going to move them over here.
That's all right. I can reach them.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Okay.
No. Thank you for chewing with your mouth closed.
That
That might have been a different problem.
that would bother me, let me tell you. All right.
All right. Well, hey, hopefully you've listened to the last episode, our introduction into the 400 years between the testaments, intertestamental period to be official. If not, pause the show, go back and listen to last week's episode.
Helpful, yeah.
So you're kind of in the situation with us, in that 400 years period with us. We talked about the politics and even how it affects how we read our Bibles, but also affects us today.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about the cultural aspects of those 400
And
years.
religious, too, if we have time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So you ready to jump in?
I'm ready.
Let's do
Yep,
it.
Yep.
Do you got any more corn nuts in there? Are you okay?
No, I do, but because you're my sister in Christ, I will treat you with respect for now.
This one time.
Yes, one time. That's right. Yeah.
On camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we talked about the political, as you mentioned, the political ramifications of those 400 silent years, and they were anything but silent. In fact, they were very noisy historically. And we are still, even in the 21st century, living the ripple effect of what Alexander did, and then ultimately what Rome did. And so we are products of that. What I want to get into is the cultural and the religious aspects of the 400 years, because so much of the New Testament is from that.
Right.
All right. And so it's very important for us to do that. I'm going to jump right into it and talk about a guy by the name of Ptolemy Philadelphus. He was another Roman ruler. Well, you can pick it up with the name.
Right.
And he charged the Alexandrian Jews. A bunch of Jews had migrated from Palestine into Egypt, North Africa, where Alexandria was.
Okay.
There was a city there, but when Alexander the Great came through, he renamed the city Alexandria, and it became probably, at the time prior to Christ, it was more important than Rome or any other city.
Wow.
And millions of Jews had migrated because of different oppression, because of different invasions. They had migrated south into North Africa because it was a safe place. Ptolemy Philadelphus made sure that the Jews would be safe, and so millions and millions of people. You take your family there, I take
Sure,
my family
right,
there,
yep.
just to avoid all of the stuff going on. And so what he does there is he forms this incredibly huge library and charges Jewish scholars or scribes to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek.
Wow.
All right, and this is probably the year 300 to 200 BC.
Okay.
And so we're still smack dab in the middle of everything as far as the silent years are going on. And so somewhere, and we don't know exactly when, but these Jewish scholars, they go in and they translate all of the Masoretic text, the Hebrew text, into Greek. And we're told it took about 100 years to do.
Wow.
And a lot of that is because the scribe rituals. For example, you had to make sure that everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. If you come to the proper name of God, you put your pen down, you wash your hands, then you write the name, and then you put the pen down again, wash your hands again, because God's name is so holy. It would later become called the Septuagint.
Yes.
And so
Which we've probably heard of.
I would think so, yeah. If you've ever read a commentary on the Old or the New Testament, you might see the Roman numerals LXX.
Okay.
And that's simply the symbol for the Septuagint. It's number 70.
Okay.
And tradition says, I don't think we have any historical data. For those of you that are nerdier than I am when it comes to this kind of stuff, you can probably look that up. But tradition says that there were 70 scholars over those 100 years
Okay.
that translated the Hebrew text into Greek.
So the Septuagint is the Hebrew Bible, so the Old Testament,
Translated
into Greek.
into Greek.
Okay.
Yeah, from Hebrew.
Okay.
Yeah, because by this time, between 300 and 200, there was still this desire, this passion to make everybody Greek.
Right.
All right, and
So
Greek,
Jews, you can have your religion, you just got to do it in Greek.
yeah,
Okay.
and plus it became the universal language. Hebrew was becoming a dead language. Aramaic was going by the wayside. Latin was coming along as far as Greek was coming along. And so it just stood to reason that Ptolemy Philadelphus would say, hey, I want your religion to prosper. And for it to prosper, people who don't know Hebrew should be able to read this. And so they translated that into that. And that's why it's interesting, because in the New Testament, when Jesus or Paul or Peter recites something from the Old Testament, if you go back to our Old Testament, it sounds different.
Right.
And the reason is simply because Jesus and the apostles probably read the Old Testament from the Septuagint.
So they were quoting the Greek,
They're probably
and we're
yeah.
reading a translation of the Hebrew.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And things, the meaning is never lost. The word meaning is never lost in the translation, but the word or the syntax is changed a lot of times. And so I know that some people say, see, the Bible's it's flawed because Jesus says this, but the passage he's quoting says this. Well, yeah, it's because it's 2,000 years later. It'd be like you and me talking in King James.
Right.
We could probably communicate, but nobody talks like that anymore. And that's why, so we would say the same thing in a different way,
Right.
with a different enunciation.
Well, and again, that helps us have confidence in the Word of God, because now we understand
Right.
why those Old Testament quotes are a little different.
Big time, yeah. And two, with, I mentioned in the last episode, in 586 and 486, the Jewish temple is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. And so many of the Jews are taken into Babylonian captivity. The ones that were taken to Assyrian captivity are scattered through all points of the world
Right.
at this time. Nobody knows where they're at to this day. They're part of the diaspora. And during that time, though, your form of worship is null and void, because the only place really where Jews were allowed to worship God in His presence was the temple.
Right.
Well, now the temple's done. It's over. It's gone. And so how are these Jews going to worship God and follow God? Because the prophets are still alive. Jeremiah's prophesying. Ezekiel's prophesying. There will be numerous other minor prophets to follow. And so how can we be able to relate to God with that? And that's where scribes come in,
Right.
where they bring the law, because Nebuchadnezzar, yeah, go ahead and bring your law. That's fine. Bring your law. Live by your law. Just live here in Babylon and be Babylonian as well.
Okay, okay.
But scribes were formed because the people needed to know the law.
Right.
Because the temple was the place where you learned the law, but there's no temple. And then
So would you have learned it from oral teaching?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the priest might read it to you.
The priest
or...
might, like Ezra did, for example, in the book of
Yep.
Ezra, he reads the law and the people are just cut to the quick because of repentance and guilt. And so definitely that would be that. But when you don't have the temple, you become more passionate to pass on the law to the younger generations
Yes.
to make sure that they know the law. And so the scribes were formed, and along with that, synagogue learning. The synagogues began to be formed. There's no mention of a synagogue in the Old Testament
Right.
because they formed during the 400 silent years.
Because there's the tabernacle, which was the temporary, and then there was the temple, which
yeah.
was permanent.
Yep.
And then the temple's gone, so now they need somewhere to learn.
They need somewhere to learn, and even just to be a people.
Yeah.
And the word synagogue, it just means the gathering. That's all it means.
Okay.
And so all of these synagogues began to be formed over the centuries where Jews, and the law, the made up law, but the law stated that you needed 10 men to form a synagogue.
Huh.
And so everywhere you can find 10 Jewish men who want to do that, you would plant a synagogue.
That's interesting.
And one of the fun things to go to Israel is to visit a lot of the sites of these old synagogues.
Oh.
It's very interesting just to see the different dynamics and things with them. Because they always faced east towards Jerusalem.
Okay.
Or I shouldn't say it. They faced towards Jerusalem.
Sure.
And when the people gathered together, the first thing they'd do is they'd stand, raise their hands, and they'd face Jerusalem, whichever way it was, and they'd recite your favorite passage.
The Shema?
The Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6. And they would start that way. So Jerusalem and the temple was always the center of Jewish
Yes.
worship. But when there's no center, what do? Well, you pray that there becomes one again. All right, and that's kind of what happens. But what's interesting in this time is, like everything else, people begin to, talk about the Jewish people, they
Right.
begin to think differently. They begin to respond differently to oppression and domination. They begin to respond differently to the law. And like any other people group, these different factions within the Jewish community begin to form. And that's where, again, we learn to read a lot in our New Testament, because some of these factions are mentioned in the New Testament. Some of them aren't, but
Right.
historically they are.
Right.
For example, the first group is the Herodians.
Okay.
Now, the tip-off there is
Herod.
Herod. These
Yes.
people must be somehow connected to Herod.
Okay.
And probably what it was, and there's very little archaeological, I think they're mentioned in the New Testament twice.
Okay.
But these would be the Hellenistic Jews.
What does that mean?
These are Greekified Jews.
Okay.
All right. In one hand they've got the law, in the other hand they've got Greek culture,
Okay.
and probably Roman culture too, eventually.
So would you say they were practicing Jews or non-practicing Jews?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that. I know that there were racial Jews, but whether
Right.
they're Orthodox or practicing Jews, I'm just not sure.
Okay.
Probably some of them, but a lot of them they just took on the Hellenistic culture, the Greek culture, and they made that their own.
Right.
Maybe it was just to get along, or maybe they embraced it. I think probably American Christians identify most with the Herodians
Okay.
than anybody, because let's face it, it's a tension. I use the word tension. You're welcome. It's a tension.
Inside joke.
Inside joke. There is this tension between living in present day 21st century American culture and being part of the church.
Right.
And most Christians respond that way. For example, there are churches in Sacramento that think that we've sold out.
Right.
Because we have music, we have a screen, we have guitars, drums.
And no hymnals.
And no hymnals. And we've sold. And then those churches, they've got a piano, they've got an organ, and they've got hymnals, which is just hailing back to a different culture.
Right.
All right. And so I think that probably all of us are Herodians to a certain
Sure.
extent.
Right.
But we don't know that much about them. And then
Okay.
the other group is the Essenes.
Okay.
And the Essenes is probably they're never mentioned in the New Testament.
So how do we know about them?
Archaeology.
Okay.
There was this group primarily made up of men, but that recently they found the skeletal remains of women
Okay.
in Essene communities. And so it stands to reason that entire families would do this.
Okay.
But the Essenes, they responded to the Greek and Roman culture by completely separating. Is that we refuse. It'd be like an Amish family.
Okay.
But only on steroids. They would refuse to abide by anything Greek or anything Roman,
Okay.
anything that wasn't Jewish. They'd say, we're done. And they're the ones that moved out into the wilderness.
Okay.
And they lived away from, they felt that the temple was defiled because probably of Herodians.
Yeah.
And a little bit later on the Sadducees. And so they were peaceful, but they just left. And all they did was transcribe. You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
Those were probably coined or printed and copied by Essenes.
Okay.
Because the Dead Sea Scroll caves were found among an Essene community.
Okay. Okay.
All right. And so they were totally separate. Totally separate.
Okay.
Didn't do business, didn't rub elbows, didn't mix at all with Jewish or Roman culture.
So, preppers?
Boy, howdy.
Says the Idahoan.
Yes, yes. Yeah, they would be exactly right. Because they had an eschatological view.
Okay, what?
They believed that all of the prophets in the Old Testament were going to come to fruition in their lifetime because of Daniel's prophecy.
Sure. Because they could see them coming
They could see them coming, yeah. And they could see them coming. And so they're thinking, we need to be ready for when the Messiah comes. And to be ready means I can't mix with these pagan cultures.
I have to stay pure.
I have to stay pure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Good observation, yeah.
So they observe the law by copying it
Yeah, basically.
over and over and over. Okay.
They observed the law as best they could without temple worship.
Yeah.
Because they believed that the temple was there, probably, but it was defiled.
Right.
And so why waste our time making sacrifices with,
With defiled. It wouldn't
system.
work.
Right,
Wouldn't
yeah.
work. The sacrifice wouldn't work.
So that's the Herodians.
Okay.
They kind of somewhat sold out. The
Okay.
Essenes,
Did the opposite.
they cut out.
Yes.
And then you've got the Zealots.
Okay.
And the Zealots, sometimes they're called Hasidim.
Okay.
When you guys went back east, you may have seen Hasidic Jews.
Oh, yeah.
And they would be the men would be the Jews that have the long curlicue sideburns hanging down. And those would be the totally separate ones. And so sometimes the Zealots were called that. I would not call Hasidic Jews today Zealots because
Right.
the Essenes were peaceful withdrawers. Zealots were warful, militaristic attackers.
Okay.
They would be the freedom fighters.
Okay.
Frankly, they would be the suicide bombers.
Wow.
They would be the ones that would indiscriminately kill Romans.
Now, hold on. Didn't Jesus call a zealot to be one of his disciples?
Yeah,
Okay.
James. And so plug James the zealot,
Okay.
plug James
Yeah,
the zealot
yeah.
into the same group with a Matthew,
The tax
a
collector.
tax collector,
Who
a
basically
sellout.
is in the pocket
Yes.
of Rome.
He would be a Herodian. And so you put James and Matthew in the same club, around the same campfire, following the same rabbi, and there had to be sparks.
Yeah.
Have you seen The Chosen?
No.
Debbie, we saw it, and we need to finish it. We just haven't done it. It's so well done. We like it. I know it's controversial.
I've heard
but
nothing. I know it's controversial, but I've heard nothing but good
yeah,
things about
it's
it.
been good. And I'm told that they have the producers have done a really good job casting James the Zealot because they would carry daggers.
Wow.
And
Well, they were
mission-
fighters. They were
yeah,
freedom fighters, right?
their mission would be to assassinate Roman soldiers,
Oh, wow.
to slice and run. And so that's what they wanted to do. And that's
Okay.
one of the reasons why Roman soldiers were around all the time is simply because of the Zealots. They had to find a way to get rid of them,
Wow.
and they couldn't do it. And so that's what's going on with the Zealots.
Okay.
And you might know this, but they gain numbers, the Zealots do, and they lead a revolt in 66 AD 66 against Rome,
Okay.
and they're decimated.
Oh.
And so
It didn't work.
That's one of the reasons why Rome fell in AD 70.
Okay.
And then, have you ever heard of the Zealots of Masada?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. The Zealots fled Jerusalem.
Okay.
About 1,000 of them fled Jerusalem, and they went to Masada, which was a fortress that Herod had built.
Okay.
and they overtook the fortress, and they lived up there for like 3 years.
Oh, wow.
There were cisterns there where you could have water. They had gardens, all that. And then Titus, the Roman general, they followed them there, and it took about 3 years for Titus to actually get to the fort. They built this humongous ramp
Wow.
getting to the top of Masada. And the day before they got to the very top and breached the gates, I think it's 950 of them committed mass suicide.
All the zealots.
All the zealots.
So no more zealots.
No more zealots. Women, children, everybody. They all committed mass suicide. Like the Jonestown kind of thing years ago. Yeah.
You're not going to take us.
No, you're not going to take us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are three less known from a biblical standpoint. The Herodians, the Essenes, the Zealots, and then the two other ones that formed during this time were the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Which, if you've ever taught kids Sunday school, the kids kind of go, boo.
Boo, yeah,
Oh, the
exactly,
bad guys. Oh, yeah.
Do you really teach our young people that? Our children?
No, it's just they just
pick it up?
They just know.
I think you're leading a boo.
No.
I think you're doing that.
No.
I've seen you teach before.
Yes, I do get interactive, but I try to remind them that the Pharisees were like the famous, popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they were.
Even though we want to say boo because
Yeah.
they're against Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees, again, there's no mention of them in the Old Testament because they
Right.
didn't exist in the Old Testament. They formed during these 400 silent years. They formed after the Babylonian captivity. They
Okay.
go off into Babylon. And okay, think about this. If you and Bruce and the girls are walking to Babylon as captives, you have no idea what's waiting for you.
Right.
You don't know if you're going to be slaves, if you're going to be mass killed, used for sacrifice. The Babylonians were wicked, wicked idolaters. You have no idea what's going to happen. But you do know this, the reason why you're leaving Jerusalem is because of prophecy. It was prophesied to the nation of Israel by Isaiah.
Right.
Unless you turn, Babylon's going to come and overtake you, and you'll be taken out of the land. Possession of the land for the Israelites was always on the condition of obedience. That's why people think today that Israel is there because God has deemed it so. Well, if God is in control, and He is, Israel shouldn't be there because they're living disobediently.
Right.
It's a secular state.
Right.
And so you're walking to Babylon, and you know that you are walking because your nation, your people, and maybe even Bruce and Beth Whitney have been disobedient to the law of God. And so when you get to Babylon and you find out that they just want you to build houses, have more kids, have grandkids, live out your lives, get a business, prosper, all that stuff.
Okay.
You're thinking, okay, but our heart is still back in Israel.
Yeah.
And if we ever go back, we will never disobey ever again. If we ever go back, we will never disobey. And so that's why the scribes came along, is that they taught the people, don't ever disobey, because if you do, we'll lose the land forever.
Wow.
And so the Pharisees were formed. They were formed to be obedient to the law. And when they first formed, you can see why.
Yeah.
We're not going to go back and lose the land again because we were disobedient. We are going to make sure that everybody obeys.
To the letter.
To the letter. And then on top of that, they created more letters.
Yes.
All right, because they had the 10 Commandments.
Lots more letters.
They had the 10 Commandments, and if one commandment is good for certain things, 50 of them are good for others. And they developed over the centuries all of these fence laws.
Right.
That kept you from obeying the big command. For example,
You mean from disobeying?
from disobeying. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, thank you. You and Debbie were raised similarly.
Yes.
My Debbie. That, let's pick, what was it? Taboos. You couldn't go to movies.
Right.
Okay. You can't go to movies. Well, where in the Bible does it say you can't go to movies? It doesn't. But it does say in the Bible, you shall not lust. You don't lust.
Right.
And that's what movies did and do, is they create lusting. And so to keep you from disobeying the lust, then you can't go to movies.
Right.
All right. Or drinking a lot. You know, I mean, you were raised no alcohol.
No alcohol.
No alcohol, nothing. Debbie was the same way. And where in the Bible does it say you can't have alcohol?
Right.
It doesn't say that.
Right.
It talks about drunkenness.
Right.
And to get drunk, you have to have alcohol.
So you better not have any.
So you don't have alcohol because then you won't get drunk. You can, and so all of these fence laws formed, and they were formed in the hundreds by the Pharisees by the time of Jesus.
Right.
That's why Jesus could say to them, "You're just a bunch of whitewashed tombs, a bunch of hypocrites."
Yeah.
Because they formed all of these laws that were obeyable, and yet the main law of God they could not disobey. That's why the Sermon on the Mount was so revolutionary to the Pharisees, and why Jesus said, if you truly want to be righteous, you got to be better than the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And at that time, there was nobody better than the Pharisees.
No one could keep the law like they could.
Yeah. So the Pharisees formed. They would be the Republicans.
Okay.
They would be the red Jews.
The conservatives.
The conservatives, yes. And they didn't have they had hardly any power in Jerusalem.
Oh.
Their power was in the north where Jesus was raised. Jesus was raised probably in a Pharisaical synagogue.
Okay.
And there was a Pharisaical triangle there where that section of Jerusalem or section of Israel in the north part of Galilee was really the red section.
Okay.
All right? That's where the Pharisees hung out. The Sadducees, which is the last group we're going to talk about today, they had control of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Because they were priests. They were all.
So the Pharisees weren't priests.
No.
Okay.
No.
Sadducees were priests.
Yeah.
We're all.
All Sadducees were priests, but not all priests were Sadducees.
Okay.
So I misspoke. There could be some Pharisees who were priests.
Okay.
But if you were a Sadducee, you were a priest because you came from certain families.
Yes.
And so when you think of the Sadducees, think of the Corleones, think of the mafia.
Oh.
Because they had the purse strings, they held the laws. They were the ones that were part of the Sanhedrin, the ruling body, and they were the ones in charge of the temple guard. They were the ones in charge of the temple, and pretty much everything surrounding temple worship.
So was there corruption there?
Big time.
Okay.
Big time.
Okay.
Well, we even saw that in Trials of Jesus, the intense corruption that was there. Yeah. They could care less about the law unless there's a profit to it. And that was the Sadducees.
A prophet like a money prophet,
money
not
prophet.
Old Testament prophet.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. And so that was this continual struggle between the Pharisees and the Sadducees until Jesus came along.
Ah, we have a common enemy.
We have a common enemy. Yeah. And so the Sadducees formed. They didn't believe anything supernatural. They were very pragmatic. They believed in what you could see. They didn't believe in the resurrection.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is Jesus, most of his dialogues and debates is with the Pharisees. He's trying to convert them because the Sadducees were just corrupt to the core. The high priest was a Sadducee.
Okay.
And just abused the system and got wealthy on the system. Played the game with the Romans and Pilate, but played the game and turned a profit with that. But Jesus mainly talked with the Pharisees. But in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, the Sadducees come to the forefront because what is the primary focal point of the Christian gospel?
The resurrection.
The resurrection of Jesus
And they're
Christ.
saying, no.
Yep.
There is no resurrection.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the ones championing that were probably from the Pharisaical side. The apostles,
Okay.
Paul was a Pharisee, and so they were championing the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so in the synagogue or in the temple area of Jerusalem, the Sadducees had the power. They didn't have the numbers, but they had the power. They had the weapons.
Right.
And so if you have the power and the weapons, you can control the masses.
Yep.
And so they would launch a lot of the persecution against the Christians in the book of Acts.
So the Pharisees' downfall or sin was legalism,
Yeah.
and probably self-righteousness.
Oh, yeah.
And the Sadducees was corruption and control. Okay.
And here's the funny thing, Beth. And I know I'm beating a dead horse. All right? But I'm going to beat it anyway.
Okay.
You know that we're into ascension gifts here.
We are into ascension gifts.
Apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers.
Yes.
You could take those 5 groups of Jews.
Oh.
And you could almost to a T assign apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers to them. Wow. And I'm not saying that they were biblical or they were right.
Right.
but God has created in us as image bearers qualities of himself
Right.
that sin has warped and abused.
Right. Right.
And when we come to Christ, those abilities come to life for the benefit of the church. And so, and I don't, if someone wants to debate me, they will win because they'll get the last word.
Right.
Because I don't have any proof of that.
Right.
But I just think it's interesting that the 5 primary groups can represent the 5 characteristics of the ascension gifts
Right.
in some form or fashion. I just think that's interesting.
That's so interesting to think about.
Yeah. And that's what went on before the New Testament. And so that blank page between Malachi 4 and Matthew chapter 1 is filled with 400 years of political and cultural and religious change that really influences how we read our Bibles, but influences how we live out our lives today.
Yeah.
Because you could look even at our own culture and you could break it down. Yes, there are Herodians, there are Essenes, there are Zealots, there are Pharisees, and there are Sadducees, even today.
Yep.
It's just how we think
Yes.
and how we respond to certain things.
And how we live our lives. Like we've talked a little bit about the John Mark Comer, his new book, which I never remember titles to. I'm listening to a podcast, and the woman is a biblical culturist, is what she calls herself.
Okay.
So fascinating. She was talking. I was listening today about how you wanted to be so close to your rabbi, the dust from his sandals got on you. And I'm thinking, like, if I'm living like a Pharisee, or if I'm living like an Essene, or any of these groups, the dust from Jesus' sandals aren't getting on me.
Yeah, that's right.
And I want to walk so close to Jesus. She even talked about Peter getting out of the boat and walking on the water. He wanted to be so close to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And these, like, we read the Bible and we think about the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they're wrestling with Jesus and their arguments with him, and then knowing that changes how I understand.
Absolutely does.
Completely.
Yeah. And hopefully what we've talked about brings to light. So when you are reading the Jesus words in the Gospels, okay, I kind of know where we're at right now.
Right.
I get why he's adamant with the Pharisees. I get why the Sadducees do what they're doing in the book of Acts. I hope it brings to light a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, should we behold?
We should behold. Yeah.
We've talked about 2 passages. Which one are we going to jump in?
Well, I like the Revelation 7 one. Let's
Let's
do
do
that
it.
one. Okay. Revelation 7, 9 through 10. This is a prophecy that, Lord willing, we can be able to experience even today. You want to read that?
Sure.
Okay.
After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb."
What kind of a picture that would be with all tribes and all peoples? All of these different people of stripes, different political backgrounds, different races, different cultures, different languages, different people groups, all coming together and lifting one voice to the Lamb of God.
Yeah.
That is our future.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, that is our future. But that doesn't mean we have to wait
No.
for the future to experience that. Is that we can experience that today. And we hope that's with this podcast, but also this little trip down ancient memory lane.
Yes.
You know?
You remember that?
Yeah.
You're not that old, are you?
Hey, I don't teach the Old Testament. I remember it. I recall it. Yeah.
That's why you're so good at it.
Yeah, right. But thanks for indulging me. I appreciate it, Beth. 'Cause,
Absolutely.
This stuff, I enjoy. This is what I enjoy about these kinds of things. And I know that a lot of people, they just glaze over when they talk about history.
You know what? I hope you're listening through the ears or lens of, I want to understand my Bible better. And this hopefully has helped. It's helped me for sure. I'm anxious to, I'm listening to the Sermon on the Mount every day until Easter.
Yeah.
And so I think tomorrow I'm going to hear it a little differently just because of learning about this history.
I really think that all Christians everywhere, regardless of education, regardless of culture, we have to cultivate a sense of biblical curiosity.
Yes.
Is it, and with the internet, that curiosity can be satisfied quickly. Wikipedia, all kinds of things that give us biblical history, and I encourage you to do that.
Yeah.
That's kind of why we exist,
Yep.
is we want to help people vocationally anyway.
Yep.
We want to help people satisfy their biblical curiosity on certain things.
Yep,
So
for
it's
sure.
hopefully happening.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us today. This has been great. Thanks, Craig, for putting together all this research.
good.
And no.
Bye.
See you next week.